Hey everyone, welcome back to the fine art of photomontage. I'm Richard Tushman. Today we're going to dive into Photoshop's brush settings. We're going to create our 4 basic brushes. Now these are your basic everyday brushes, kind of like my everyday hoodie here. They're comfortable, dependable, and they almost feel like a part of me. And we're going to use them for everything from dodging and burning, to editing masks, to brushing in subtly modulated gradations in color and tone. Let's have a look. Okay, so we're going to create 4 basic brushes, 2 pressure sensitive brushes and 2 non-pressure sensitive brushes. And these are the 4 basic brushes that I use for 95 to 98% of the work I do in Photoshop. The only other brushes I use are really specialty brushes like painting in flyaway hairs. And you'll notice I have 2 brush palettes open here. I have the brush settings palette, which is where we're going to actually create the brushes. And then I have the brushes palette here, which is where we're going to save them to. And you can see I have a few folders of these are the brushes that I've stored already, but we'll start from scratch for the purposes of this tutorial. So let's start and create our first small pressure sensitive brush. So I'm going to go to the toolbox and click on the brush tool, and you can see that if I click and hold down that brush tool, that the key command to get that brush tool to call it up is a B, and that's usually what I do is I just hit the letter B and that calls up the brush. Okay, so the first brush, as I said, is going to be a small pressure sensitive brush. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make it small. I'm going to bring the pixel size down to 40 pixels. So it's going to be a 40 pixel wide brush. And there we go. And now here we have all the different categories for shaping the brush. And for the most part, I use very few of these. Obviously, the brush tip shape, which is where we set the size and the spacing. And since this is a soft brush, I'm going to come down to this hardness category here, and I'm just going to bring it all the way down to 0. So that's a completely soft brush. And for the spacing, right now it says 24%. The spacing, basically, you can see what happens, that the brush stroke actually is a series of these dots. And so if you bring the spacing up, you can actually see the discrete dots. In a perfect world, I guess you would want 0 or 1% spacing. The problem is that it really is a huge memory hog. And so we compromise and we put like pretty much a constant spacing value of 25%, and that seems to work pretty well for our purposes. Now, because we want this to be pressure sensitive, there's really only one of these categories that really pertains to that, and that is the transfer function. So I'm going to click that transfer function on, and you can see that the preview goes from soft to hard. And we also we have to actually set this function. So I'm going to actually click on this category, and then it calls up its own little menu here. And this is really set here the way that I want it. For control, you want this, if you click on this little pop-up menu, we want the control on the actual pen pressure. That's going to give us our pressure sensitive touch. And I actually like to have there's another category called flow jitter. And I also like to have that set to pen pressure. It gives me a little bit more sensitivity that I find. And the only other category that we're going to select here is this category called build up. And what this build up setting does is it allows us to make use of this flow function here rather than the opacity to lighten the stroke. So if we just use the opacity to lighten the stroke, and so I'm going to bring the opacity, say, down to 20% or 17%. And if I paint, no matter, as long as I don't lift up the brush, no matter how many times I go over that, it's never going to exceed that opacity setting of 17%. Whereas if I'm going to turn this back up to 100, and I'm going to turn on this flow setting and bring this, say, down to roughly 17%. And now when I paint and I go over that stroke, it does actually build up. And so it's a really more natural way of painting. It builds up the same way that an ink stroke would build up. And so when we're painting on the fly, we're going to actually not come up to the menu here. We can actually use our numeral keys to adjust the flow setting rather than the opacity setting. So if I type in a 9, it goes to 90%. If I type in a 3, it goes to 30%, and a 1 is 10%. And again, it's a much more natural way that the ink would build up the way it would with an actual airbrush. And so we're going to pretty much always have this build-up function turned on. Okay, so now we're going to save this brush as a preset. So let's just check our settings one more time. We have the transfer function on, we have the build-up function on, our size is 40 pixels, our hardness is set to 0, and our spacing is 25%. So we're going to come over to the side menu here, click on that, and just move over to this top item where it says New Brush Preset. And here we have the default name is Soft Round 40. I'm just gonna call it Soft 40. And then you have a couple of choices here. I do want the brush size captured in the preset. I don't like to include the tool settings. That means that anytime I click that brush, I would get the brush tool. But sometimes I like to use this brush with, say, the clone stamp. So I leave this box unchecked, and then I'm going to click OK, and then it appears over here in our brushes menu. And now we can actually going to create just a larger version of this brush. And so all we're going to do is we're going to come back to our brush settings palette, and we're just going to increase the size. I'm just going to go up here to this dialog box and type in 400. And the settings, again, are exactly the same, except this is a larger brush. And so I'm going to come back up to here and click again the New Brush Preset. And I'm just going to call this Soft 400. And I'm going to click OK. And this is our larger brush here. Okay, now we just need to set really two hard brush versions of these, which are non-pressure sensitive. Okay, so to create the hard non-pressure sensitive versions of these brushes, we're simply going to come back to our brush settings palette. We're going to uncheck the transfer function, and we're going to just increase the hardness to 100%. And we're going to save this one as Hard 400. And click OK. And then I'm going to just simply come back here, and I'm going to bring the size down to 40. And I'm going to save this one as Hard 40. Okay, and those are our 4 basic brushes. Now, a student once asked me, why would you want a hard, non-pressure sensitive brush? And the answer is because there are many times when you're painting on a mask and you want to make sure that that portion of the mask is either 100% black or 100% white, so that the image isn't revealed slightly revealed where you don't want it revealed, or slightly hidden where you don't want it hidden. So in that case, you really want to make sure that you're painting with an 100% opaque brush. Now, these are just our default sizes, but of course we can customize both the size and the hardness or softness on the fly using key commands, and that's our practice. So the key command to make the brush bigger is simply a right bracket, and it successively makes it bigger, and the left bracket key makes it smaller, and the shift right bracket key makes it harder, and the shift left bracket key makes it softer. Alternatively, on a Mac, if you hold down the Control and Option keys and drag it down, it makes the brush harder, and click and drag the mouse up, it makes the brush softer. click and drag the brush click and drag the mouse to the right, it makes the brush larger, and click and drag the mouse to the left, it makes it smaller. And on a PC, I'm told you simply hold down the Alt key and the right mouse key to do that same function. And now if we want to put them in a nice little folder, as you can see, I have my little brushes here in a folder. These are basically masking brushes. So if I open up my masking folder, those are the brushes that we just made. So if I want to put these in a folder, I'm going to simply shift click all of them and then click on the folder, and I'll call this new masking brushes. Click OK, and there they are in their own folder. And you can keep your brushes nice and organized like that. And there you have it. So please subscribe to the channel if you haven't, and click like if you like the video. Please follow us on Instagram and check out our deluxe intensive online course. Those links are in the description. And as always, thanks so much for watching.